I am 68 years old, and today my only son struck me across the face because I asked his wife not to smoke near me. He called me a smelly old man and told me to shut up. And she just smirked, saying it was about time someone put me in my place. I fell, my glasses shattered, and as I picked up the shards from the floor with trembling hands, I realized one simple thing. For 15 years, I tolerated humiliation because I believed this was what family meant. For 15 years, I kept silent about what I had. For 15 years, my son did not even suspect whose apartment he was living in and who his father really was. But 15 minutes after that blow, I made one phone call, and everything changed forever. My son thought I was a helpless old man hanging around his neck. He was wrong. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let us get back to the story. The kitchen smelled of roast beef and collard greens because Marcus Holloway had been cooking since early morning, just as he had done every day for the last 15 years. He stood at the sink washing dishes, looking out the window at the November yard where the wind chased the last yellow leaves across the wet asphalt. He thought about how winter was coming soon, which meant he would have to pull the warm clothes down from the attic. The water was hot, almost scalding, but he liked it that way because the warmth soothed his old hands, which had been aching more frequently at night in recent years. Behind him, a lighter clicked. Marcus smelled the cigarette smoke even before he turned around. Vanessa was sitting at the kitchen table, legs crossed, smoking and flicking ash directly into his cup of half-finished tea. She was 39 years old. She possessed a cold kind of beauty, the kind that does not warm you, but cuts you. And she never hid her attitude toward her father-in-law. To her, he was just furniture. Outdated, useless furniture that should have been thrown in the dumpster a long time ago. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Asthma had plagued him for 7 years, ever since Sarah, his wife, had passed away. Doctors said it was psychosomatic, that grief sometimes settles in the lungs and refuses to let you breathe. He pulled his inhaler from the pocket of his housepants, showed it to his daughter-in-law, and spoke as softly as he could, trying not to sound demanding or accusatory. "Vanessa, honey, could you please smoke on the balcony? I have asthma. It is hard for me to breathe when there is smoke nearby. I am not complaining, just asking." Vanessa did not even look in his direction. She took a deep drag, blew smoke toward the ceiling, and spoke in that special tone Marcus heard from her constantly. A tone of absolute contempt. "This is my kitchen too. If you don't like it, you can leave." Marcus wanted to object. He wanted to say that this was not entirely true, that legally the kitchen and the entire apartment belonged to him, but he remained silent, as he always did. He turned back to the sink and continued washing dishes, trying to take shallow breaths, trying not to cough, trying to be invisible. At that moment, Derek entered the kitchen. His son, his only child, his flesh and blood, whom he had raised, educated, and helped to stand on his own 2 feet. Derek was 42. He worked as a project manager at some construction company, and in recent years he reminded Marcus more and more of a man carrying a heavy load on his shoulders but refusing to admit the load existed. Derek had been irritated since morning because there were problems at work, because management was pushing him, because his wife was demanding a new car, because life, in general, was unfair to him personally. Derek heard his father's last words and stopped in the doorway. His face twisted into that grimace Marcus had seen so often lately. A grimace of irritation, turning into rage. "Are you starting again?" Derek asked. There was so much venom in his voice that Marcus involuntarily hunched his shoulders. "You're whining about asthma again. It is the same thing every single day. Vanessa has the right to smoke in her own home." "Son, I just asked," Marcus began, but he did not get to finish. Something snapped in Derek. Some fuse blew, and he stepped toward his father with a twisted face. Marcus saw it as if in slow motion. His son raising his hand, the fist clenching, the blow flying. He did not have time to dodge, did not even have time to raise his hands to protect himself. "Shut up. You smell worse than cigarettes. Do you have any idea how sick we are of you?" The blow landed on his cheekbone, hard and brutal. Marcus flew backward, hit his hip against the edge of the sink, and fell to the floor. His glasses flew off his face and smashed against the table leg, lenses shattering across the tiles with a quiet tinkle. The pain was sharp and bright, but another pain was even sharper, the one that settled somewhere deep in his chest, right where his heart should be. Vanessa laughed. She did not just chuckle. She laughed, throwing her head back, speaking with pleasure in her voice. "It is about time someone put you in your place. How much of this whining can we take?" Marcus lay on the cold floor, staring at the ceiling. He was 68 years old. He had raised this boy, who was now standing over him with fists. He had stayed up nights when Derek was sick as a child. He had worked 2 jobs to pay for his college tuition. He had sold his summer cabin to help with the down payment on Derek's first car. And now, this boy, his son, his blood, stood over him and did not even think to offer a hand to help him up. Derek was breathing heavily, and the realization of what he had done was slowly appearing on his face. But instead of remorse, something else appeared there, something like justification. He was convincing himself that he was right, that his father was to blame, that the old man had driven him to it with his eternal complaining. "Get up," Derek muttered, turning away. "Stop acting like a victim." Marcus sat up slowly, then just as slowly rose to his feet. His knees were trembling, but he forced himself to stand straight. He bent down and began collecting the shards of his glasses, carefully placing them in his palm, as if they were something valuable, something that could still be fixed. Vanessa put out her cigarette right in his teacup and stood up from the table. "Let's go, Derek," she said to her husband with a smile. "Let him clean up here. At least he is good for something." They left the kitchen, and Marcus was left alone. He stood motionless, holding the fragments of his glasses in his palm, staring at the door behind which his son and daughter-in-law had disappeared. Something changed in him at that moment. Something shifted and clicked into place almost audibly. For 15 years, he had endured. For 15 years, he had convinced himself that this was normal, that every family had difficulties, that his son was just tired from work, that his daughter-in-law just did not understand what a good person he really was. For 15 years, he had lied to himself. But now, standing in this kitchen with a bruised face and broken glasses, Marcus finally saw the truth. This was not a family. It had never been a family. It was something else entirely. Something ugly and cruel that he called family only because he was afraid of being alone. He went to his room, a small room at the end of the hallway that they had allocated to him when he moved here after his wife's death. It was the smallest room in the apartment, a former storage space that had once been converted into a semblance of a living area. A narrow bed, an old wardrobe, and a nightstand with a table lamp fit in here. On the wall hung a single photograph of Sarah, his late wife, looking at him with a soft smile, as if she wanted to say something important. Marcus sat on the bed and just stared at the wall in front of him for a few minutes. His cheekbone throbbed with pain, and he could feel a bruise forming. It will be visible tomorrow, he thought detachedly. Neighbors will see, they will ask. I will have to lie and say I fell, as always. But then he remembered something. He remembered a business card he had received 3 months ago from a young attorney who had come to their building regarding a neighbor's inheritance. This attorney, a serious woman in her 50s, had lingered to talk to him for some reason. And Marcus, not knowing why himself, had told her more than he should have. He told her about his son, who did not speak to him for weeks, about the daughter-in-law, who called him a burden, about how he felt like a stranger in his own apartment. The attorney had listened to him carefully and given him her card. If you ever want to get your documents in order, give me a call, she had said then. Sometimes, putting your papers in order helps put your life in order. Marcus took this card out of the nightstand drawer where it had lain all these months and looked at it with nearsighted eyes. The letters blurred without his glasses, but he remembered the phone number by heart because he looked at this card every evening before bed, thinking that one day he would call. Today was that one day. He took out his old flip phone, which his son called an antique, and constantly demanded he throw away, and dialed the number. The beeps seemed very loud in the silence of the small room. Law office of Mrs. Sterling. Hello, a female voice answered. Hello, Marcus said. His voice sounded strange even to himself, calm and firm, as if it belonged to another man. This is Marcus Holloway. You gave me your card 3 months ago. Do you remember? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then the voice warmed. Yes, Mr. Holloway, I remember you. Are you ready? He looked at his wife's photo on the wall. Sarah was smiling at him, and it seemed to him that she was nodding approvingly. Yes, he said. I am ready. Please come. You can come right now, if you are free. He dictated the address, which the attorney already knew, and hung up. Then he leaned back on the pillow and closed his eyes. His heart was beating too fast, and he felt something pressing in his chest. But it was not asthma. It was something else, something like liberation. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus felt that he was in control of his life. He lay there for a few minutes, listening to the sounds of the apartment. Voices of Derek and Vanessa drifted from the living room. They were watching TV and discussing something, laughing. They had already forgotten about what happened in the kitchen. For them, it was just an episode, a minor incident that meant nothing. They did not know that this episode had changed everything. Marcus got up from the bed and went to the wardrobe. On the high shelf, behind stacks of old sweaters, lay a box. He took it out and opened it. Inside were documents. Many documents that he had kept all these years without showing anyone. Deeds, lease agreements, bank statements, the history of his real life, the life his son knew nothing about. He spread the documents on the bed and began sorting through them, checking that everything was there. The deed to this apartment, the very one they lived in, was in his name. He had never transferred it to his son, although he had promised to do so many years ago. Something had held him back, some inner feeling that whispered, "Wait, do not rush. See first what kind of man your son becomes." Now he saw. There were other documents here too. Deeds to 2 condos in downtown Chicago, which Marcus had been renting out all these years through an agency. The rent money went into his account, which Derek knew nothing about. He did not know because he never asked, never took an interest in how his father lived, whether he had money, whether he needed help. Derek was sure that his father lived on a small pension and depended entirely on him. This certainty made him arrogant and cruel because he believed his father had nowhere to go. A poor old man without a penny. Where would he go? Derek was wrong. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced his chest, and Marcus grabbed his heart. The pain was acute, piercing, unlike anything he had felt before. He tried to inhale, but air would not enter his lungs. Black spots swam before his eyes, and he realized he was falling, but could do nothing about it. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Sarah's face in the photograph. She was still smiling. The crash of the fall echoed through the apartment, and for a few seconds, everything went quiet. Then Derek's irritated voice came from the living room. "What is it this time? Did he drop something again?" Vanessa laughed in response. "Maybe he finally tripped over his own feet? Don't pay attention. He will figure it out himself." But the crash did not repeat, and not a sound came from the father's room. Derek waited another minute, then reluctantly got up from the sofa. "I'll go check," he grumbled, "before he breaks something valuable." He walked down the hallway to his father's room, pushed the door open, and saw Marcus lying on the floor, unconscious. Scattered around him were some documents, and a strange expression was frozen on his face, partly pain, partly relief. Derek's first reaction was irritation. Another performance, he thought, seeking attention again. But then he noticed that his father's chest was not rising, and something cold stirred inside him. "Dad," he called uncertainly. "Dad, what's wrong?" There was no answer. Derek stood in the doorway of the room, looking at his father's motionless body. And somewhere deep inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time began to wake up. Fear. Derek stood in the doorway of the small room, staring at his father's still body, unable to move. His feet seemed rooted to the floor, and his head felt empty and hollow, like an abandoned house. Marcus lay on his side. One arm was tucked under his body, the other thrown to the side, and white sheets of paper were scattered near it. His father's face was gray, almost an earthen shade, and a fresh bruise darkened on his cheekbone. The very bruise Derek had given him 15 minutes ago. Vanessa appeared behind him and peeked into the room over her husband's shoulder. "What is going on in there?" she asked with lazy curiosity. But then she saw her father-in-law lying there. Her voice changed. "Did he fall or something?" Derek did not answer. He finally forced himself to take a step forward, then another, and knelt beside his father. His hands were shaking when he touched Marcus's shoulder. And this trembling was unfamiliar to him because Derek Holloway was not used to being afraid, not used to feeling helpless. "Dad?" he called again, and his voice sounded hoarse and uncertain. "Dad? Can you hear me? Open your eyes." Marcus did not react. His chest was rising and falling slightly, barely noticeable, and this was the only sign that he was still alive. Derek pressed his fingers to his father's neck, trying to find a pulse like he had seen in movies, but he could not understand if he was feeling something or if it was his own heart beating loud, fast, and frightened. "Call 911, he barked at Vanessa, who was still standing in the doorway. "What are you standing there for? Hurry!" Vanessa flinched at his tone and took out her phone. Her fingers dialed the number while Derek continued to sit on the floor next to his father, looking at his motionless face and feeling something dark and stifling rising inside. It was not just fear for his father's life. It was a fear of a different kind. Fear of what would happen next. Fear of consequences. Fear of responsibility. "Ambulance. A man is in bad shape here. Elderly man, 68 years old. I don't know. He is unconscious. Yes, he is breathing. Address, 14 Oak Street. Apartment 73. Vanessa spoke quickly and in a businesslike manner, and Derek noted to himself that she did not even come close to his father. She remained in the doorway, as if afraid to approach, or simply didn't want to. While they waited for the ambulance, Derek sat on the floor and, for the first time in many years, truly looked at his father. Marcus had aged greatly, in the 15 years he had lived with them. His hair had gone completely gray and thin. His skin hung loose on his cheekbones and under his chin. His hands were covered with age spots. When did he get so old? Derek thought. When did this tall, strong man, who once carried me on his shoulders through the entire park, turn into this thin old man with shaking hands and eternal health complaints? Derek's gaze fell on the papers scattered next to his father, and he instinctively reached for them. But at that moment, the doorbell rang. "The paramedics," Vanessa said, and went to open it. Derek quickly got up, brushing off his knees, and kicked several sheets of paper under the bed with his foot. He did not understand why he did it. Just some instinct told him that these documents needed to be hidden before strangers saw them. Two medics entered the room. A young guy with a case and a woman in her 50s with a tired but attentive face. The woman immediately knelt beside Marcus and began the examination, while the guy unzipped the bag and took out instruments. "Heart attack," the doctor pronounced a minute later, addressing her colleague. "Blood pressure is dropping. Let's get an EKG." Derek stood by the wall observing their actions, feeling like a superfluous and useless object in this small room. Vanessa remained in the hallway, and he could hear her talking to someone on the phone, probably a friend, discussing what was happening. The doctor suddenly raised her head and looked straight at Derek. Her gaze was sharp and evaluating, and under that look, Derek felt uncomfortable. "Is this your father?" she asked. And it wasn't exactly a question. "Yes," Derek answered. "Marcus Holloway, 68. He has asthma. He uses an inhaler." The doctor nodded, but continued to look at him with that same attentive gaze. "Where did he get the bruise on his face? And the abrasion on his temple?" Derek felt his mouth go dry. He swallowed and said the first thing that came to mind. "He fell. Probably when he felt sick. I found him already on the floor." The doctor did not answer, but something in her eyes changed. She bent over Marcus again and continued working. But Derek saw how she carefully examined the bruise, how her fingers gently touched his father's cheekbone and temple. At that moment, Marcus groaned and opened his eyes. His gaze was cloudy and confused. He clearly did not understand where he was or what was happening. He tried to get up, but the doctor gently held him back. "Lie still," she said. "You lost consciousness. We are the ambulance team. We'll figure out what happened to you." Marcus blinked several times, and gradually his vision cleared. He looked at the doctor, then at the young medic with the instruments, then at Derek, standing by the wall. When his eyes met his son's eyes, Marcus did not turn away or close them. He just looked calmly and directly, and in that look there was something new, something Derek had never seen before. "How are you feeling?" the doctor asked. "Can you tell me what happened?" Marcus shifted his gaze to her and was silent for a few seconds, as if considering the answer. "My heart seized up," he said finally. "I got agitated and fell." The doctor leaned closer and lowered her voice, but Derek still heard every word. "Mr. Holloway, the bruise on your cheekbone is not from a fall. I have been a doctor for 30 years, and I know what marks from a fist look like. Did someone hit you?" The silence in the room became tangible, thick, and heavy. Derek felt his heart pounding somewhere in his throat, and he wanted to get out of there, to run away, and be anywhere but in this room under this expectant silence. Marcus looked at his son, long, attentively, as if seeing him for the first time in his life, then turned back to the doctor. "I fell," he said quietly, but distinctly. "I tripped over the threshold and fell." The doctor held the pause, not taking her eyes off him. "Are you sure?" Marcus nodded. "I am sure." Derek exhaled, not noticing that he had been holding his breath all this time. His father had covered for him. The father he had struck in the face 15 minutes ago had lied to protect him. Derek should have felt gratitude, but instead, he felt something strange. Some vague shame mixed with irritation. The doctor took a business card out of her pocket and put it on the nightstand next to the bed. "This is my personal card," she said to Marcus. "My name is Dr. Alana Vance. If you need help, any help, call me. I am serious." Marcus looked at the card, then at the doctor, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. "Thank you, Dr. Vance. I will call." The next half hour was filled with medical procedures. They did an EKG, measured his blood pressure several times, gave him some pills under his tongue. The young medic asked about the medications he was taking, chronic diseases, allergies. Marcus answered patiently and in detail, and Derek realized with surprise that he didn't know half of what his father was saying. He didn't know his father had high blood pressure for 5 years, didn't know he took pills every morning, didn't know he had stomach problems, and couldn't eat fried food. How many years had Derek lived next to this man and known nothing about him? Finally, the doctor announced that his condition had stabilized and hospitalization was not required, but complete rest for at least a week and a mandatory visit to a cardiologist were necessary. "Is there someone to look after him?" she asked, addressing Derek. "Yes, of course," he answered too quickly. "My wife and I are here." The doctor looked at him again, with that same gaze that made Derek feel like a schoolboy caught lying. "Good," she said finally. "Remember, complete rest, no excitement, no stress." She emphasized the last words, so that even Derek understood the hidden meaning. The medics packed their things and left, and the apartment plunged into silence again. Vanessa peeked into her father-in-law's room. "Well, will he live?" she asked with a smirk. "I was already scared we'd have to organize a funeral." Derek flinched as if from a slap. "Shut up," he snapped sharply. "Just shut up right now." Vanessa raised her eyebrows in surprise, but said nothing, and went into the living room. Derek remained standing in the hallway between his father's room and the living room, not knowing where to go or what to do. He felt he should go in to his father, say something, maybe even apologize. But what would he say? "Sorry I hit you? Sorry I called you smelly?" The words got stuck in his throat and refused to come out. In the end, he turned around and went into the living room to Vanessa, to the TV, to the familiar life where he didn't have to think about anything or apologize to anyone. Marcus lay on his narrow bed and listened to his son's footsteps fading away. He wasn't surprised that Derek didn't come in. He wasn't surprised and wasn't upset because he expected nothing else. 15 years had taught him not to expect warmth, care, or even basic politeness from his son. He turned his head and looked at the nightstand where the doctor's card lay. Dr. Alana Vance. Something in her gaze seemed familiar to him, some deep weariness mixed with understanding. The look of a person who had seen much and survived much. Next to the doctor's card lay another card, the one from the attorney, Ms. Sterling. Marcus remembered calling her before he lost consciousness. She promised to come. She would probably be here soon. He slowly sat up on the bed, overcoming weakness and slight dizziness. The documents he had spread out before the attack were partly on the floor, partly on the bed. He began collecting them, checking that everything was in place. The deed to this apartment. Here. Deeds to the 2 downtown condos. Here. Lease agreements. Here. Bank statements. Here. Everything was in place. His entire real life hidden from his son and daughter-in-law all these years. Marcus looked at Sarah's photograph on the wall. "I should have done this a long time ago," he said quietly, addressing her. "You always said I was too soft, that Derek was walking all over me. You were right." Sarah smiled at him from the photo, and it seemed to him that approval flashed in her eyes. He heard voices from the living room. Vanessa was saying something to Derek, and although the words were indistinguishable, the tone was clear. She was complaining, outraged, demanding. She always complained, was outraged, and demanded. From the first day she appeared in their family. Marcus remembered meeting her for the first time 20 years ago. Derek was 22 then. He had just finished college and brought home a beautiful girl with cold eyes. Sarah figured her out immediately, saw right away what her love-blinded son did not see. "This girl will be a misfortune for our family," she had told her husband then. But Marcus didn't listen. He believed that his son's love was sacred, and one shouldn't interfere with it. Now he understood that Sarah was right, as she was about everything else. The doorbell rang, and Marcus heard Derek go to open it. Voices in the hallway, surprised and wary, then footsteps down the corridor. "Dad?" Derek's voice sounded at the door of his room. "Some attorney is here to see you." Marcus neatly put the documents into a folder and got up from the bed. His legs were weak, but he forced himself to stand straight. Now it was important to show strength, to show that he was in control of the situation. "Let them in," he said. "And you come in too. You should listen." Attorney Sterling turned out to be exactly as Marcus remembered her. A tall woman with a straight back and attentive gray eyes that seemed to see right through a person. She wore a strict navy blue suit, her hair was gathered in a neat bun at the back of her head, and she exuded a sense of calm confidence, typical of people accustomed to dealing with other people's secrets and money. Behind her followed a young man in his 30s with a leather briefcase, obviously her associate. "Mr. Holloway," she said, entering his small room and scanning it with a quick evaluating glance. "I came as soon as I could. You said it was urgent." "Yes," Marcus answered, and pointed to the only chair in the room. "Please have a seat. This conversation will take a while." Derek stood in the doorway, shifting his confused gaze from his father to the attorney and back. He clearly didn't understand what was happening, and this lack of understanding frightened him. Over the last 15 years, he had gotten used to his father being predictable as an old clock, always knowing what to expect from him. And now, everything had gone sideways, and the ground was slipping from under his feet. "Dad, what is going on?" he asked, trying to make his voice sound calm and confident, but not succeeding very well. "Why do you need an attorney? You almost died just now." Marcus looked at his son, and there was no anger or resentment in his gaze, only the deep weariness of a man who had carried a heavy burden for too long and finally decided to drop it. "That is exactly why, son," he answered. "That is exactly why I almost died today, and it made me realize something. Life can end at any moment, and I want my affairs to be in order. Come in, listen. It will be interesting for you." Derek slowly entered the room and leaned against the wall by the door, crossing his arms over his chest. This pose was supposed to express confidence and control, but in reality, it betrayed his anxiety. Vanessa appeared behind him, looking into the room with curiosity, and Marcus nodded to her. "You can listen too, Vanessa. This concerns both of you." Ms. Sterling sat on the offered chair and opened the folder her associate had brought. The young man remained standing by the wall, ready to take notes or hand over documents at the first request. "Mr. Holloway, you told me 3 months ago that you wanted to get your property affairs in order," the attorney began, in a businesslike tone. "I have prepared all the necessary documents based on the information you provided then. But before we continue, I must clarify your decision is final. Marcus nodded. Final and irrevocable. Derek shifted nervously from foot to foot. What decision? What are you talking about? Dad, explain normally what is going on here. Marcus turned to his son and just looked at him silently for a few seconds. He looked at this 42-year-old man, his only child, and tried to find in him that little boy who once ran to him with open arms, screaming, "Daddy, Daddy," and laughing with happiness. But that boy was long gone. In his place stood a stranger with a hard face and cold eyes, a man who, 2 hours ago, had struck him in the face and called him a smelly old man. I will explain now, Marcus said. Sit down somewhere. The conversation will not be easy. Derek looked around, but there was nowhere to sit. The only chair was occupied by the attorney. He remained standing by the wall, and Vanessa stood next to him, putting a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of silent support. Ms. Sterling took the first document out of the folder and placed it on the bed in front of Marcus. Let's start with the main item, she said. The deed to the apartment at 14 Oak Street, Unit 73. That is, this apartment where we are right now. Derek chuckled and relaxed. Well, finally, he said with relief in his voice. I was wondering when you would do this. It's about time you transferred the apartment to me. You promised for so many years. The attorney raised her head and looked at him with an unreadable expression. You misunderstood, Mr. Derek. This is a deed of ownership for your father. The apartment belongs to him. It always belonged to him and belongs to him to this day. The smile slowly slid off Derek's face. What do you mean, to this day? Dad promised to sign it over to me 10 years ago. We had an agreement. Marcus shook his head. Promised, but didn't sign over. You are right. We had an agreement, and I intended to do it. But every time, something stopped me. Some inner feeling I couldn't explain. Now, I understand what it was. I was waiting. I wanted to see what kind of man you would become. Derek turned pale. His hands crossed on his chest, clenched into fists. And what does that mean? You decided to punish me now? Because of what happened in the kitchen? Marcus did not answer immediately. He looked at his son long and hard, as if memorizing his face, as if seeing him for the last time. Because of what happened in the kitchen? He repeated slowly. You call it what happened in the kitchen. You hit me, Derek. You struck your father across the face, called me a smelly old man, and your wife laughed. Vanessa flinched, as if slapped, but remained silent. Her eyes narrowed, and she looked at her father-in-law with undisguised hatred. I lost my temper, Derek squeezed out through his teeth. I was wrong, but that is no reason to stage such a circus with lawyers. Ms. Sterling cleared her throat delicately. If you will allow me, I will continue, she said. We have many documents to review. She took the next paper from the folder, then another, and laid them on the bed next to the first deed. Deed to the condo at 8 Main Street, Unit 42, 2 bedrooms, 800 square feet. And deed to the condo at 22 Broadway Avenue, Unit 115, 3 bedrooms, 1,000 square feet. Both condos also belong to Marcus Holloway. The silence that followed these words was deafening. Derek stood motionless, his face slowly changing, passing through all stages from disbelief to shock and back. Vanessa next to him opened her mouth but couldn't utter a word. What? Derek finally squeezed out. What condos? From where? Marcus folded his hands on his knees and spoke calmly, as if talking about the weather or the price of bread. I bought the first condo on Main Street 30 years ago when you were still in school. Mom and I saved money. We wanted you to have your own place when you grew up. Then we bought the second one on Broadway. That was 20 years ago. I have been renting out both condos all these years. The money went into a special account you didn't know about. But why? Whispered Derek. Why did you never say? Did you ask? Marcus replied. And for the first time, bitterness sounded in his voice. In the 15 years I have lived in this house, did you ask once how I live? Did you once take an interest in whether I have money for medicine? Did you once offer to help? Derek was silent, and his silence was more eloquent than any words. Marcus continued, You were sure I was a poor old man on your neck, that I lived on a penny pension and depended on you completely. And this conviction made you arrogant and cruel because you thought I had nowhere to go. A poor old man without a dime. Where would he go? He paused and looked his son straight in the eyes. But I have a choice, Derek. I always had a choice. I just didn't want to use it because I believed that family was more important than money, more important than pride, more important than anything. I was wrong. Vanessa finally found her voice. She stepped forward, her voice ringing with barely suppressed rage. Wait, is this some kind of mistake or a prank? Where did you get the money for 2 condos downtown? You worked as a simple engineer all your life. Marcus turned to her, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. A simple engineer, he repeated. Yes, I was an engineer, but I also obtained several patents for my inventions back in the day, working for the auto industry. When the industry changed, those patents turned out to be very much in demand. Sold the licenses to several manufacturers. There was enough money for the apartments and some left over. Ms. Sterling took a bank statement from the folder and placed it on top of the other documents. Current balance in Mr. Marcus Holloway's account, she said in an even voice, is $185,000, plus a monthly income from the rental of 2 properties in the amount of $3,500. Vanessa turned so pale, she looked like she was about to faint. She grabbed her husband's arm, as if looking for support, but Derek himself looked no better. Almost 200 grand, he whispered. And 2 condos downtown. Dad, why did you live in this closet? Why did you tolerate all this? Marcus got up from the bed. He moved slowly, still weakened after the heart attack, but he held himself upright, and there appeared in his posture something new, some dignity he had hidden all these years. Because I wanted to be close to family, he answered. Because after Sarah died, I was lonely in an empty apartment, and I thought I would be better off next to my son. I thought you loved me, Derek, that it was just hard for you to express feelings, like many men. I found an excuse for every rude word of yours, every sideways glance, every show of disrespect. He walked to the window and looked out at the gray November yard. I paid for everything in this house, he continued without turning around. Did you think it was your money? No, I left envelopes of cash in your bedroom every month for groceries, for utilities, for repairs. You thought it was Derek earning so well. But it was my money. That's not true, Vanessa said, but her voice sounded uncertain. Derek earns good money. Derek earns okay, agreed Marcus, but not enough to pay for your lifestyle. A new car every 3 years. Vacations abroad every summer. Expensive clothes, restaurants, entertainment. Where do you think the money for all this came from? He turned and looked at his daughter-in-law. I know you never loved me, Vanessa. I know you considered me a burden and dreamed of getting rid of me. I heard your conversations about the nursing home. I heard you call me an old senile fool and a smelly grandpa. I heard everything. Vanessa stepped back as if Marcus had hit her. But I endured, he continued. Endured for the sake of my son, for the sake of family, for the sake of hope that someday everything would change. Today that hope died. He looked at Derek. You hit me, son. Struck me in the face because I asked your wife not to smoke near me. And in that moment, I realized I have no family. There are people who use me, tolerate my presence for my money, and wait for me to finally die. Dad, that's not true, Derek began, and unfamiliar notes appeared in his voice. Something like despair. I didn't know about the money. I really thought you lived on a pension. If I had known, what would have changed if you had known? Marcus interrupted him. You would treat me better? Respect me more? Not hit me in the face? He shook his head. If you need to know how much money a father has to respect him, then you don't understand what respect is. And you don't understand what family is. Ms. Sterling stood up from the chair and approached Marcus. Mr. Holloway, she said softly, are you sure you want to continue? We can reschedule for another day. After what happened today, you need rest. Marcus shook his head. No, he said firmly. Today, right now, I have waited too long. He turned to his son and daughter-in-law. I'm selling this apartment. The buyer has already been found. The documents are ready. All that's left is to sign. You will have 30 days to find other housing and move out. What? Exhaled Vanessa. You can't do that. This is our home. We have lived here for 15 years. This is my home, Marcus answered calmly. It always was mine, and I can do whatever I want with it. Derek stood silently, his face reflecting a struggle of conflicting feelings. Anger, fear, shame, despair, everything mixed into one painful grimace. Where will we go? He asked finally. And his voice sounded hollow and lost. We don't have money for another apartment. We won't be able to rent in this neighborhood. That is no longer my problem, Marcus answered. And there was no gloating in his words, only weariness. For 15 years, I solved your problems. Now, you will solve them yourselves. He looked at the attorney and nodded. Let's sign the papers, he said. I want to finish this today. Mrs. Sterling laid the documents out on the small table Marcus usually used for reading books before bed. Her associate took a blue ink pen from his briefcase and placed it next to the papers. Everything happened in a businesslike and measured way. As if it were some routine procedure and not an event overturning the life of an entire family. Derek stood by the wall, watching what was happening with wide open eyes, like a man seeing a nightmare and unable to wake up. His face was gray, almost as gray as his father's face after the heart attack, and his hands, hanging by his sides, trembled slightly. Vanessa, next to him, clutched his elbow and whispered something in his ear, but he seemed not to hear her words. First document, announced Ms. Sterling, lifting a sheet of paper with typed text. Sales agreement for the apartment at 14 Oak Street, Unit 73. Buyer, Mr. Richard Dalton. The entrepreneur is ready to complete the transaction within a week after signing the preliminary agreement. The transaction amount is $450,000. Vanessa gasped, and the sound was like the sob of a wounded animal. $450,000, the apartment she had lived in for 15 years, which she considered hers, was worth nearly $500,000. And all this money was floating out of her hands right now, right before her eyes. Wait, said Derek, peeling himself off the wall and taking a step forward. Wait, please. Dad, let's talk. Let's discuss everything calmly, without lawyers, without strangers. We are family. Marcus raised his head and looked at his son. And in his eyes, there was neither anger nor the triumph of a victor, only the infinite weariness of a man who had waited too long for words that were never spoken. Family, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. Today in the kitchen, you told me to shut up. You hit me in the face, Derek. And your wife laughed. Is that your idea of family? I lost my temper, Derek said, his voice trembling. I was wrong, I admit it. But surely That's no reason to destroy everything we built for so many years. Dad, I'm begging you, give me one more chance. I will change, I promise. Marcus was silent, looking at his son. And in this silence was something heavy and unliftable, like a stone at the bottom of a river. He remembered all the times Derek had promised to change. Promised after he first yelled at him in front of strangers. Promised after he forgot his birthday 3 years in a row. Promised after he called him a burden in a conversation with Vanessa, thinking his father couldn't hear. How many chances have you asked for, son? Marcus said finally. How many times have you promised to change? I lost count. And every time I believed you, because I wanted to believe, because you are my son, my blood. I loved you more than anything in the world. He got up from the bed and approached his son, stopping a step away from him. They stood opposite each other, father and son, and between them lay a chasm of 15 years of unspoken grievances and unshed tears. But today you crossed a line, Marcus continued, not because you hit me. The blow is just a consequence, but because I saw contempt in your eyes. Real, deep contempt for the man who gave you life. And I realized that all these years I have been deceiving myself. Dad, whispered Derek, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Dad, please! Vanessa stepped forward, pushing her husband aside with her shoulder. Her face was twisted in a grimace where fear mixed with rage, and her voice rang with barely restrained hysteria. You have no right, she blurted out. We took care of you for 15 years, tolerated your illnesses, your whining, your constant presence in our house. We earned this apartment. You owe us. Ms. Sterling raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. Her associate stepped back as if trying to become invisible. Marcus turned to his daughter-in-law, and an expression appeared on his face that she had never seen before. It was not contempt, and not anger. It was something akin to pity. Took care of me, he repeated. Vanessa, in 15 years, you never once brought me a glass of water when I was sick. Never once asked how I was feeling. Never once said a kind word. You smoked in my presence knowing I have asthma. You called me a smelly old man behind my back. You discussed with your friends when I would finally die and free up the room for you. Vanessa opened her mouth to object, but Marcus raised a hand, stopping her. I heard everything, he said. The walls in this apartment are thin, and my hearing is still good enough. I heard every word you said about me, and I kept silent because I hoped it would pass, that you would get used to me, accept me as part of the family. But you didn't accept me, and you never will. Vanessa turned crimson with humiliation and rage. She turned to her husband seeking support, but Derek stood with his head down, silent. Derek, she hissed. Say something. This is your father. Talk to him. Derek raised his head and looked at his wife, and something strange flashed in his eyes. Some new understanding that wasn't there before. And what do you want me to say? He asked quietly. That he is wrong? But he is right, Vanessa. He is right about everything. He turned to his father. I didn't know you heard everything, he said. Didn't know you knew about our conversations. Thought you were asleep in your room and didn't understand anything. Thought... He fell silent, unable to continue. Marcus nodded. You thought I was a senile old man out of my mind who understands nothing. I know. You haven't just thought that for a year. That hurts too, son. It hurts a lot. Mr. Sterling cleared her throat delicately. Mr. Holloway, she said softly, if you want to take a break. No, he answered firmly. No breaks. Let's continue. He returned to the bed and sat down, picking up the first document. His eyes ran over the text, checking every line, every figure, every word. Then he took the pen and signed at the bottom of the page. Clearly, confidently, without hesitation. Vanessa screamed as if the signature caused her physical pain. "No, you can't. This is our home." She rushed to the bed, trying to snatch the document from her father-in-law's hands. But the attorney's associate was faster. He intercepted her hand and gently but firmly pushed her away from the bed. "Please, calm down," he said. "Any physical interference with the transaction participants can be construed as pressure and will entail legal consequences." Vanessa yanked her arm away and stepped back, breathing heavily. Her eyes flashed lightning, but she remained silent, realizing she had lost. Marcus signed the second document, then the third. Ms. Sterling stamped each signature with her seal. In this sound, the dull thud of the stamp on paper sounded in the silence of the room like hammer blows. Derek stood motionless, watching his father sign the documents that deprived him of his home, money, and future. He understood he should do something, say something, somehow stop this madness. But he couldn't move. His feet were rooted to the floor. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He could only watch his life crumbling. "Last document," pronounced the attorney, placing one more sheet of paper before Marcus. "Order for change of registration address. From this moment, you will be registered at 8 Main Street, Unit 42. Marcus signed this document too. "That's it," he said, putting down the pen. "Done." He stood up from the bed and looked at his son and daughter-in-law. They stood side by side, but a crack seemed to have formed between them. Vanessa looked at her husband with accusation, as if he were to blame for what was happening. Derek looked at the floor, unable to raise his eyes. "You have 30 days, Marcus said. "Find yourselves housing and move out. The buyer is willing to wait." "Dad," whispered Derek, "where do we go? We have no money for rent, no savings. We won't make it." His voice broke, and he fell silent. Marcus looked at him, and something like pity stirred in his heart. This was still his son, his boy, whom he had rocked in his arms, to whom he had sung lullabies, and whom he had taught to ride a bike. But this boy had long ago grown up and become a stranger. "You are a grown man, Derek," he said finally. "You are 42. It is time to learn to solve your own problems. I did it for you for too long." He turned to the attorney. "Thank you, Ms. Sterling. I appreciate your help." Miss Sterling gathered the documents into the folder and stood up. "Always at your service, Mr. Holloway. If you need anything else, you know how to find me." She headed for the door. Her associate followed her, but on the threshold of the room, she stopped and turned around. "Mr. Holloway," she said quietly, so only he could hear, "you made the right decision. Do not doubt it." Marcus nodded, and the attorney left. Her footsteps clattered down the hallway, the front door slammed, and the apartment plunged into silence. Vanessa was the first to find her voice. She turned to her husband, her face distorted with anger. "This is all because of you," she hissed. "Because of your idiotic stunt in the kitchen. If you hadn't hit him, then none of this would have happened. We lost everything. Because of you." Derek raised his head and looked at his wife. And in his eyes, there was something new, some bitter clarity. "Because of me," he repeated slowly. "Yes, probably because of me. But you laughed too, Vanessa. You said it was about time someone put him in his place. You were happy when I hit my father." Vanessa opened her mouth to object, but found no words. She stood in the middle of the room, opening and closing her mouth like a fish thrown onto the shore. Marcus watched them, and on his face was a strange expression, a mixture of sadness and relief. He finally saw his son as he really was, a weak man who allowed his wife to control him, a coward who could not protect his own father, but still a man in whom a conscience remained. Derek, Marcus said, and his voice sounded softer than before. I'm not doing this out of revenge. I'm doing this because I have no choice. If I stay here, you will continue to treat me the same way. You will yell at me, insult me, maybe hit me again. And one day my heart won't take it. He paused and looked his son in the eyes. I want to live, son. I am 68, but I am not ready to die yet. And to live, I must get away from you. It is the only way. Derek listened to his words, and something changed in his face. Anger and resentment slowly gave way to understanding, heavy and painful. Do you really think I could hit you again? He asked quietly. Marcus did not answer. His silence was more eloquent than any words. Vanessa snorted contemptuously. Enough of this circus, she said. Derek, let's go. No need to humiliate yourself before this old senile fool. He will regret what he did. She turned and left the room, stomping her heels loudly. A second later, a crash came from the bedroom. She threw something against the wall. Derek did not move. He stood looking at his father, tears shining in his eyes. Dad, he said in a trembling voice. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I acted like a complete animal all these years. But I want you to know I loved you in my own way, crookedly, wrongly, but I loved you. I just didn't know how to show it. Marcus looked at his son for a long time, then slowly approached him and put a hand on his shoulder. I know, son, he said quietly. I love you too. That is why it hurts so much. They stood like that for a few seconds. Father and son, connected by touch and separated by a chasm. Then Marcus removed his hand and stepped back. You need to make a decision, Derek, he said. What kind of life do you want? Who do you want to live it with? I won't tell you what to do. You are an adult, but think carefully. What happened today can be a turning point for you, or it can change nothing. The choice is yours. Derek nodded, unable to speak. He turned and slowly left the room, leaving his father alone. Marcus went to the window and looked out at the evening yard. The streetlights had already come on, and their yellow light reflected in the puddles on the asphalt. He felt strange, empty, as if the air had been let out of him. Everything he had kept inside for 15 years had finally burst out. And now he didn't know what to do with this emptiness. On the nightstand lay the ambulance doctor's card. Dr. Alana Vance. Marcus took it in his hands and looked at the clear letters of the name for a long time. Then he took out his phone and dialed the number. The morning of the next day turned out cold and clear, as if nature decided to give Marcus a sign that he had made the right decision. The sun flooded his small room with golden light, and dust motes danced in the air like tiny ballerinas on an invisible stage. He woke up early, before 6, and lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling and listening to the silence of the apartment. It was quiet behind the wall. Usually at this time, Vanessa was already rattling dishes in the kitchen and talking loudly on the phone with friends, not caring that her voice bothered someone sleeping. But today there was not a sound, as if the apartment had died out, as if the events of yesterday had sucked all the life out of it. Marcus slowly got out of bed, overcoming slight dizziness that still reminded him of yesterday's heart attack. The doctor said he needed rest, that he shouldn't worry or be nervous, but he knew that today would be the hardest day of his life. The day he would cross the threshold of this apartment for the last time. He took an old suitcase out of the closet, the very one he and Sarah had taken on their honeymoon 45 years ago. The suitcase was worn and faded, but still sturdy, like Marcus himself, who had survived so much and was still standing. He opened it and began packing, carefully selecting what he wanted to take with him into his new life. First, he took Sarah's photograph off the wall and carefully wrapped it in a soft sweater so it wouldn't break during transport. Sarah looked at him from the photo with her kind eyes, and it seemed to him she was nodding approvingly, as if saying, "Finally, you decided. Finally, you are doing what you should have done many years ago." Then he folded several shirts, trousers, and a warm sweater that Sarah had knitted for him shortly before her death. He wore this sweater only on special days when he wanted to feel her presence nearby. Today was just such a day. At the bottom of the suitcase, he placed a book, a volume of poetry by Langston Hughes that his father used to read to him when he was a little boy. This book had passed from generation to generation in their family, and Marcus had once dreamed of passing it on to his son, and he to his. But now he understood that this dream was not destined to come true, that the chain had broken somewhere along the way. And it wasn't just Derek's fault. He packed slowly, taking his time, as if performing some important ritual. Every item he took in his hands was connected to memories, people, events that made him who he was. And he said goodbye to them one by one, putting them in the suitcase or leaving them on the closet shelves. When the suitcase was packed, Marcus sat on the bed and took out his phone. Yesterday evening he had called Dr. Alana Vance, who had left him her card. The conversation turned out to be long and unexpectedly warm, as if they had known each other for many years. She told him that she had been widowed 3 years ago, that her husband died of cancer, that she still couldn't get used to the emptiness in her apartment. And he told her about Sarah, about his son, about 15 years of loneliness among people who were supposed to be his family. They agreed to meet this morning. Alana volunteered to help him move. She said she had the day off and would be glad to spend it usefully. And Marcus agreed, although he usually didn't like accepting help from strangers. But Alana didn't seem like a stranger to him for some reason, as if they were acquainted in some other life and had just found each other again. There was a quiet knock on the door, and Marcus flinched in surprise. In 15 years, no one had ever knocked on his door. Usually, they just barged in without warning, as if he were not a person, but a piece of furniture with no right to personal space. "Come in," he said, and his voice sounded hoarse after the long silence. The door opened, and Derek appeared on the threshold. He looked as if he hadn't slept all night. Dark circles lay under his eyes, his hair was disheveled, and stubble had appeared on his cheeks. He stood in the doorway, hesitating to enter, and looked at his father with eyes that held something new, some pain mixed with understanding. "May I?" he asked quietly. And this question, so simple and so unusual, made Marcus's heart clench. "Come in," he answered, pointing to the chair by the wall. Derek came in and sat on the edge of the chair, as if afraid to take up too much space. He was silent, looking at the packed suitcase, at the bare walls from which the photographs had disappeared, at the empty closet shelves. The room looked as if life had already left it, as if the person who inhabited it had dissolved into thin air. "Are you really leaving?" Derek asked finally, and his voice trembled. "Really," Marcus answered. "I already called a cab. It will be here in an hour." Derek nodded and fell silent again. The silence between them was thick and heavy, filled with everything that hadn't been said in 15 years. All those words that got stuck in the throat and refused to come out. "Dad?" Derek began, and his voice sounded cracked like an old record. "I didn't sleep all night. I thought about what you said yesterday, about how I treated you all these years, and I realized." He paused, searching for words, and Marcus waited patiently, not rushing him, giving him time to gather his thoughts. "I realized you were right," Derek continued. "Right about everything. I acted like a total animal. Allowed Vanessa to humiliate you. Humiliated you myself, considered you a burden, although you never were. You did everything for us, and we..." His voice broke, and he covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, and Marcus saw before him not a 42-year-old man, but a little boy who cried when he scraped his knee falling off a bike. The boy he used to comfort, hugging him and saying everything would be okay. But now he couldn't comfort him the same way as before. Too much water had flowed under the bridge. Too many words had been spoken. Too many grievances had accumulated. "Derek," Marcus said softly, "look at me." Derek raised his head, and his eyes were red from tears. He looked broken and lost, like a man who suddenly realized that his whole life was built on a lie. "I'm not leaving out of revenge," Marcus said. "I'm leaving because I want to live. Not exist, tolerating humiliation and waiting for death, but live. I am 68, but I am not an old man yet. I have strength, means, the desire to be happy, and I have the right to it." "I know," whispered Derek. "I understand." Marcus got up and walked over to his son. He put a hand on his shoulder and spoke quietly, but firmly. "You are my son, Derek. I loved you from the moment I first held you in my arms at the hospital. Loved you when you took your first steps. Loved you when you got your first F in school. Loved you even when you caused me pain. That love isn't going anywhere. It will stay with me until the end of my days." He paused and looked his son in the eyes. "But love does not mean I have to tolerate everything. Love does not mean I have to sacrifice my dignity, my health, my life for people who do not value that sacrifice. I confused love with self-destruction for too long. It is time to stop." Derek listened to his words and slowly nodded, as if each one penetrated him and changed something there, shifted, rebuilt. "What should I do, Dad?" he asked finally. "How do I live now?" Marcus sighed and walked to the window, looking at the yard flooded with morning sun. "It is not for me to tell you, son," he answered. "You are 42? It is time to make decisions yourself and take responsibility for them. But if you want my advice..." He turned to his son. "Think about what kind of life you want. Who do you want to live it with? Vanessa, she is not a bad person, but she makes you worse. Near her, you become someone you wouldn't want to be. I am not telling you to leave her. That is your choice. But think, are you happy? Truly happy, and not just used to it?" Derek was silent, and in his silence, Marcus read the answer. No, he wasn't happy. Probably hadn't been happy for many years, but was afraid to admit it even to himself. Footsteps came from the hallway, and Vanessa appeared in the doorway. She was dressed and made up as if going somewhere, and an expression of cold contempt was frozen on her face. "Derek, what are you doing here?" she asked sharply. "Why are you humiliating yourself before him? He kicks us out onto the street, and you sit and cry like a little boy. Derek slowly rose from the chair and looked at his wife. And in his gaze was something new, some firmness Marcus hadn't seen before. "I'm talking to my father," he said quietly but distinctly. "And this is not humiliation. This is called being a son." Vanessa opened her mouth to object, but Derek raised a hand, stopping her. "Wait for me in the room," he said in a tone that brooked no argument. "We need to talk. We need to talk about a lot of things." Vanessa looked at him with amazement for a few seconds, as if not recognizing the man she had married. Then she snorted contemptuously and left, stomping her heels loudly. Derek turned to his father, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. "First step," he said. "Small, but the first." Marcus nodded and felt something warm stir in his chest. It was hope. Tiny, fragile, but hope nonetheless that his boy could still change. At that moment, the phone rang. Marcus looked at the screen and saw an unknown number. But something told him who was calling. "Hello?" he said, bringing the phone to his ear. "Mr. Holloway, it's Alana." A soft female voice came through the receiver. "I'm already downstairs by the entrance. The cab has pulled up too. Are you ready?" Marcus looked at the packed suitcase, at the bare walls of the room, at his son standing by the door. "Yes," he said. "I am ready. Coming down in 5 minutes." He hung up and grabbed the suitcase. Derek stepped forward and silently took the suitcase from his hands, as if wanting to help with at least something. Somehow atone for his guilt. They left the room and walked down the hallway to the front door. Marcus walked slowly, looking around for the last time at the apartment where he had lived for 15 years. The kitchen, where he cooked food for a family that didn't appreciate him. The living room, where he sat in the corner while others watched TV and pretended he didn't exist. The hallway he had walked down thousands of times trying to be invisible. He would not miss this place. Not for a single second. At the front door, Marcus stopped and turned to his son. They stood opposite each other, father and son, and between them, there was no longer that chasm that separated them just yesterday. The chasm hadn't disappeared completely, but a bridge had appeared over it. Fragile and unreliable, but a bridge nonetheless. "Dad," Derek said, and his voice trembled. "I don't know what to say. Forgive me for everything." Marcus looked at his son for a long time, and then did what he hadn't done for many years. He hugged him tightly, in a fatherly way, as he once hugged the little boy who was afraid of the dark. Derek froze for a moment, and then hugged his father back, and his shoulders shook again with silent sobs. "A son is not the one who is born," whispered Marcus in his ear. "A son is the one who loves. Become that son, Derek. It is not too late." He pulled away and took an envelope out of his pocket that he had prepared in advance, placing it on the stand by the door. "Here is the attorney's address and some documents," he said. "I left you exactly as much as the love you gave me over these years." Derek looked at the envelope but didn't take it. He understood what was inside and was afraid to know the truth. Marcus opened the door and stepped out onto the landing. Then he turned back one last time. "Goodbye, son," he said. "Or maybe, see you later. That depends on you." He began to descend the stairs, and his steps echoed in the stairwell. With every step, he felt something heavy sliding off his shoulders, the air becoming lighter, his chest expanding, and breathing becoming easier. Downstairs by the entrance, Alana was waiting for him. She stood next to a yellow cab and smiled. Her smile was warm and sincere, like the sunlight flooding the yard. She wore a simple beige coat and a light scarf, and she looked exactly as a woman should look next to whom you want to spend the rest of your life. Marcus walked out of the entrance and stopped, looking at her. She stepped toward him and took his hand, simply and naturally, as if they had done it 1,000 times. "Ready?" she asked. Marcus looked at the building where he had spent 15 years, at the windows of the apartment on the 3rd floor, where his past life remained, at the neighboring window, where Mrs. Henderson waved goodbye to him. "Ready?" he answered, and smiled. They got into the cab, and the car started moving. Marcus looked out the window, at the streets floating by, at people rushing about their business, at trees that had shed their leaves awaiting winter. And he felt something strange, something long forgotten. He felt alive. Alana sat next to him holding his hand, and her touch was warm and soothing. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations, just was there. And that was enough. "You know," Marcus said, not taking his eyes off the window, "I am 68. Most people my age think life is over, that ahead lie only illness, loneliness, and death." He turned to Alana and looked her in the eyes. "But I think they are wrong. I think life can begin at any age. You just have to decide to take the first step." Alana smiled and squeezed his hand tighter. "Home?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "Home." The taste carried him away from the past toward a future he had chosen himself. And for the first time in many years, a smile played on his lips. A real, sincere smile of a man who had finally found freedom. And in the apartment on the 3rd floor, Derek stood by the window watching the departing taxi. In his hand was the envelope his father had left, and he still hesitated to open it. Finally, he broke the seal and looked inside. There lay a single sheet of paper and something else, something small and hard, wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped the cloth and saw his father's broken glasses, the very ones that had shattered into pieces when he hit him yesterday in the kitchen. On the sheet of paper, only a few words were written. "This is all you left me in 15 years. Broken glasses and a broken heart. But the heart can still be glued back together. Try, son. It is not too late." Derek stood by the window for a long time, holding the broken glasses and his father's note. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but he didn't notice them. He thought about who he was and who he wanted to become, about what he had lost and what could still be returned. Behind him, a door slammed. That was Vanessa getting ready to leave somewhere. She said something to him, but he didn't hear. He heard only his father's voice sounding in his head, again and again. A son is not the one who is born. A son is the one who loves. And Derek realized he still had a chance. Small, fragile, but a chance. A chance to become the son he should have been from the very beginning. He turned from the window and walked toward the door. He had much to do, much to change, much to fix. But he had already taken the first step. The hardest, most important step. He admitted he was wrong. Dear viewers, thank you for watching this story to the end. Marcus Holloway's story is a story about how it is never too late to change your life, never too late to choose yourself and your dignity. This is a story that love does not mean tolerating humiliation, and that true family is not those bound to us by blood, but those bound to us by heart. Do you think Derek will change after his father's departure? Will he be able to become a different person, or will he return to his old life? Write your opinion in the comments. I am very interested to know what you think. If this story touched a nerve, if it made you think about something important, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Every like and comment helps the channel grow and bring you even more interesting stories. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. On somam